Hello, welcome to lecture 1 of 12, the Mind Mend series on eradicating addiction. I'm Christy O'Connor. I'm your host and the creator of this content. So for this lecture and for the remaining 11 lectures, this is going to be a two-part lecture. The first part is going to be dedicated towards dealing with the symptom of addiction itself. So we are going to go over recommendations for what some good first steps are for that, and then how to implement those steps effectively. And then the second part of the lecture is going to be geared towards dealing with that wounding pattern that's causing the symptom of addiction, as described in the introduction lecture to this series. So for the first part of this, we are going to focus on what addiction needs to be dealt with first. And what I recommend typically for people is dealing with the addiction that is causing the most dysfunction in your life first. Maybe there is only one. Oftentimes there are more. If you only have one, that's excellent. That's less work for you, I suppose. But for a lot of us, there are more. So I would recommend choosing the one that is the most disruptive. And there are reasons for this. The first reason is because oftentimes when we stop with one outlet facet of addiction, oftentimes what will happen is it will manifest in these other ways. Sort of these other outlets get hit harder when we block off the outlet of whatever the drug of choice is, whether it's a behavior or an actual substance. So if we don't start with the one that is causing the most disruption, if we work on some of these littler ones, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but what can happen is if you shut those outlets off, then this one that's already pretty severe gets even more severe. And if it's already causing a fair amount of disruption or threatening your life, that is not something that we want to have happen. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is because once you deal with the one that's up here, there's a feeling of like, okay, I got this for the rest of them, which is really empowering and does lend to a smoother sailing in terms of implementing this process for other means. So I would recommend starting with whatever that is for you first, whether that's a specific substance or a specific behavior. Sometimes, a lot of times, there are specific behaviors that are tied to specific substances, and as you start to kind of remove or block the cultivation of certain symptoms of certain addictions, you will likely notice sort of a tendency to move towards these other ways of things. Totally normal, and we deal with them one by one. So the first part of this lecture is going to be about cultivating clarity. And we're going to do that by spacing out the time between the symptom, or i.e. between the use of whatever it is. I'm going to refer a lot to nicotine addiction as an example, just because that's the most recent one that I've dealt with, and it's the easiest one for me to relate to right now. But please bear in mind that this could be geared towards any behavior, social media, eating disorder problems, binge purge, infidelity, porn, whatever it is. It can be applied to anything substance or not. So we're going to create space in that. And in that space, we're going to start noticing the different things that come up. So this first part of this first step is really about gaining awareness as to how much of our energy, of our time, of our psyche this particular symptom is taken up, and then what happens when we push ourselves towards the edge of what is possible in terms of length of time or abstinence from engaging in said symptom. So we're cultivating awareness. We're also simultaneously going to be building or in the beginning parts of building a skill set in terms of managing what comes up in the absence of this substance or this behavior. And please bear in mind that, if you've had some kind of dependence on this certain behavior for some time, it is going to take time to rewire things. So in this first part, it can be helpful to understand just how much of ourselves is going towards this thing, because it will motivate us to do whatever we need to do to get that reprogramming in order as quickly as possible. Because once you see this, it's really difficult to keep voluntarily donating your energy and time to something that doesn't give you anything in return. So in a breakdown, we're going to pick what symptom, i.e. what addiction, we're going to work on first. So for some people, again, that's going to include a substance. It's going to look like alcohol. It's going to look like opiates. It's going to look like nicotine. It's going to look like whatever. And then for other people, maybe that's a behavior. What you'll also start to understand is in terms of what's happening in the brain with these things, whether a substance is being introduced or not, you're still addicted to the same thing. You're still addicted to what's going on up here. And so once you get to a point where there's understanding of this and awareness of this, it gets very easy to sort of pinpoint like, oh, that's the addictive thing. I gotta prune that out. So start with the thing that's causing the most disarray in your life. Start with the thing that is going to kill you first, or that's threatening things like your job, your marriage, your family, whatever. So the very first step in this, I want you to take an entire day, an entire 24 hours, and I want you to just observe this come up in its normal way. We're not trying to do anything about it. We're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to put any distance there yet. We are simply noticing what's there. So from the time you wake up in the morning, I want you to very intentionally notice how you're thinking about this thing. How quickly are you drawn towards that thing? Do you engage in it first thing in the morning? Do you think about engaging in it first thing in the morning? How does it show up throughout your day? If you're working, how many times throughout your workday do you have to sort of take time or space or energy or whatever to feed this thing? When you get home after work, how large of a role does it play in terms of stress management, or how you interact with your family, or how much you isolate, or do you need to sneak off? All of these things, just dedicate an entire day towards noticing how this addiction, this pattern, this habit shows up in your life. So for me, a lot of times when I was in this sort of observing pattern of it, if I was just letting it run rogue and not trying to do anything about it, one of the first things I would do in the morning is pour a cup of coffee and have a cigarette. So that's how it first started showing up. And then, about every 90 to 120 minutes, like clockwork, that addiction would knock to be fed again. I would feed it. So there was this predictable pattern that showed up, and it was a predictable span of time. It was a predictable behavior. It was a predictable outcome when I engaged in the behavior. So you just start to notice these things, start to notice your rhythm with these things, start to notice how you feel, both in the time leading up to the use of the thing and right after you use the thing. And you're not judging any of this. Like, don't try to stop early on in this, the habit of like judging yourself if you feel craving, or like feeling shame after you engage in the thing. Like, this isn't about that. This is about simply noticing your pattern with this thing. So, because if you can see it as it is and you can start to kind of predict and track it, it's much easier to get a hold of. So take a day, not trying to do anything about it. Try to stay out of shame and guilt if you can. I know that's really difficult for most of us, but do your best, and just watch. Just watch how often you're partaking, watch how often you want to partake, watch what happens right after you partake, all of these things, and just kind of be mentally noting kind of what's going on for you. So after you've observed yourself for 24 hours and you've got some kind of idea of time interval, how often you're having to use the thing, or you want to use the thing, or whatever, at the end of that 24-hour period, or whether maybe it's the end of that day that you're awake, or sometime in that 24-hour span, I want you to make a goal for yourself of how long you are going to go with regularity for the next week or the next 6 days or however long you go before watching lecture 2, of how long you are going to go between use. So when I first started doing this with cigarettes, at first it was 4 hours. I was like, I'm going to go every 4 hours. I'm not going to do it before then. And so cravings for me would hit somewhere between an hour and 20 minutes and 2 hours. So that was pushing it out approximately 2 hours past when the craving would sort of hit its peak. So set a goal. And maybe that goal is an hour without thinking or donating energy, or maybe it's 4 hours, or maybe it's, if you're more of a binge pattern-y person, maybe it's like, I'm going to go 3 or 4 days or something. The pattern that you're dealing with is what you're going to use to set the goal. So make it realistic, whatever it is. If you smoke or drink every day, don't be like, I'm going to go all week without doing these things, because you're probably not going to do that. I mean, if you do, great. And I hope it sticks. I really do. For the rest of us, don't do that. Set realistic goals for yourself. So set yourself up to succeed. So if you think of a time interval, like for me, when I was first starting the process of weaning off cigarettes, it was like 6 or 7 hours. I was like, no, that's too long. I can't do it. And so if that's the reaction that comes up in you when you think of the time interval, shorten it. So where you want it to be is not like, oh, that's too easy. That's too close to like the pattern I already have with this thing. You want it to be somewhere between that and I can't do that. So you want it to feel like, okay, that might be a little bit challenging, but doable. So set the time interval there. Set some goal in terms of how long you're going to go without doing this thing. So, if you normally go 2 to 3 days without engaging in the behavior, maybe set it to 3 or 4. Again, use your insides to figure out where that should be, which is somewhere between the, I can do that, by default, that's too easy, and I can't do this, somewhere in between that space. So you're going to set the goal. And then starting on day 2, we are going to make an attempt at holding this. So you're going to start trying to meet your goal. And so some people will be able to hold their goal, and they'll be able to do it perfectly or close to perfectly throughout the course of the week. And that's awesome. That means you probably did a pretty decent job at setting your time interval in a realistic place, which is good. And it means you're making consistent efforts to hold that, which is also good. So that's one way that it can go. The other way that it can go, and I've had it go both ways for myself, is you can fail epically, or maybe you hold it for a couple days and then you fail epically. Or maybe just the idea of moving towards this thing like triggers some kind of resistance in you, and you're like, I can't fucking do this, and you fail epically the first day. That can also happen. So it can look a lot of different ways. Again, try to resist the urge to go into shame or guilt or judgment or defeat with this. Because the truth is, if you keep trying, you're not going to fail. Are you going to have small failures where you aren't able to meet your goal or do the thing for a day or so here and there, or maybe like a chunk of days, or even maybe, you hope not, but maybe even like a chunk of weeks throughout this process? Like probably, possibly, most likely, yes. Because again, we're thinking of this as a phasing in of healthy things and a phasing out of unhealthy things. And until you have the tools to deal with what comes up in pruning out this unhealthy stuff, number one, and number two, the things to fill in that space, this is very hard. So most of us don't get this right the first time. Almost none of us, actually. So please don't be too hard on yourself, and just think of this first week as getting your footing. Okay? So on day 2, we've observed the first day. We've set our goal. Day 2, we're going to start doing the thing. We're going to start actively trying to wait for the self-determined time period between use patterns. So when we're doing this, if you can go, also note, if you can go longer and you want to go longer than the goal you set for yourself, absolutely do it. Absolutely do it. And it's possible to, a lot of times people will underestimate themselves and what they can do in this. And so I'm like, oh, I set my goal for 3 hours, but I know I can go 5. Go 5. Do whatever you feel like you can do. And then maybe, maybe there are times you're like, no, I'm stressed out. Something happened at work. I can only go 3 or something like that. All okay. So in this space that we're creating, we're going to start noticing the things that come up. And there's usually a lot of things that come up. So we're going to think about it we're going to distill it down to basically 3 categories. So we're going to physical, what's happening for you physically, what's happening for you emotionally, and what's happening for you mentally, cognitively, in terms of your thought patterns. So in these periods of abstinence, you can start to notice things. And at first, depending, like if you're specifically working on a substance, or even if you're not, even if you're working on a behavior, there is probably going to be some withdrawal from dopamine release from, depending on what the substance is and what the mechanism of action is. Neurocognitively, there are going to be different things for different things. But a large part of what you will feel in the beginning is withdrawal. However, how you experience this and how you teach yourself to deal with it is directly related to how we are going to deal with the wounding. So it's not, it's extremely valuable to be with this and to learn how to navigate it. And it directly pertains to how we are going to approach things when we get further on in this. So it can be helpful to make either a mental note or an actual note if you want to carry around a little notebook, or like if you want to carry around some rubber bands and put a rubber band on your wrist every time you think about using or whatever. It can, however you want to do this, try to become aware of, in this space that you're creating, how much energy this is consuming of you cognitively, emotionally, and physically. So make a mental note of, how often am I thinking about this? Am I thinking about this 10 times an hour? Am I thinking about this, once or twice? Like, what's my level of obsession with this? Like, just start to notice that. And start to bring awareness to, especially as you get towards the end of your prescribed period of abstinence, start to notice what's happening for you. Are you getting agitated? Are you getting shaky? Are you getting tired? Are you getting angry? Are you getting jittery? I don't know, whatever it is, create your own way of describing what it is. But notice what's going on in your physical body and try to explain it in the best way that you can, or at least be brainstorming words for how to best describe it. Second, I guess the physical and the emotional, obviously there's a direct link here. So if those two go together for you, there's no specific need necessarily to split them directly, but it can be useful to start to separate your physical experience from your emotional experience, in terms of being able to manage both of those things. So notice what's coming up for you physically. Notice what's coming up for you emotionally. So are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling hopeless? Are you feeling blotto, like nothing, like numb? Are you, whatever it is. So take a mental note of that and start paying attention to it. And then also, towards the end of your prescribed period of abstinence, start noticing your thought patterns around the thing. So start noticing how you're thinking about it. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait until this 3 hours is up so that I can go smoke a cigarette or do whatever it is. Or is it, like, this program is so stupid, I don't even know why I'm trying to do this. This is dumb. Like, I don't even have a problem. Like, whatever, there's all kinds of things that are going to come up, particularly when you're in the middle of a craving. So you can use that period of time leading up to your next use to watch your brain do what it does around justifying this thing, around, maybe you're angry at it. Maybe you're like, I hate that I'm trapped in this thing. I hate that I'm, it shows up so differently for different people. But there's typically some narrative around the behavior and again, the physical, the emotional, and the cognitive, the actual thoughts that are going on around this. All of these are directly related, so it can be a little bit difficult to tease them out. But do your best, and so start noticing these things. And what you're going to do is, at the end of the day, and this is why I want you to have a notebook, because you're going to make 3 columns. So we'll go physical, emotional, mental, or cognitive. Okay, so you got your 3 columns, and then maybe, so we're going to be doing this for a week, or maybe you've decided you're going to space it out 10 days between lectures or whatever. So this isn't like a wildly extensive writing exercise, although it can be if you want it to be. So basically, here you go. So you have your 3 columns: physical, emotional, mental, cognitive, your days. Each day before you go to bed, I want you to sit down and write about what's happening for you in these periods of abstinence. What is happening for you? What's happening for you physically? What's happening for you cognitively? What's happening for you emotionally? So every night before you go to bed, you're going to do this. And before you sit down to actually write, before you do that, take anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes and just sit down and thank yourself for trying. And even if you failed epically, even if you didn't even kind of come close to whatever your goal was, thank yourself for trying and for showing up and for being willing to become aware of these things in the first place. And please note that sometimes when you step into a place of being willing to and ready to take direct and confrontational action sort of against something like this, against a behavior like this, sometimes we fight against ourselves. And so you'll have a part of yourself that comes up and is like, nope, I am not doing that. This has been a coping skill that we have. I am not giving it up. It just throws this sort of temper tantrum. And this can happen, and this is okay. Because eventually, if you don't stop trying, we get to a point where we soften that, and these 2 parts of us come together and realize that the letting go of this is actually what they both want. And you're probably not going to start out with this understanding, but it can develop very rapidly. So if you fail epically, please still take the time to thank yourself for, even being willing to step into this space. So before you sit down to write, you thank yourself for doing this. And you also tell yourself that no matter what happens, how badly you fail, how epically you fail, that you are not going to stop trying. And please make this commitment to yourself. Because if you do that, there's literally no way you can fail. There's no way. If you really show up and you were really committed and you really are in a space where you're like, I'm going to keep trying at this until I get it right, you will get it right. This is just like anything else that you practice. Nobody sits down with an instrument and plays it perfectly the first time that they play it. But the more you practice and the more you show up and the more you feel into it and the more you commit to it, the more proficient you get at playing this instrument. And this is not any different. So thank yourself and commit to yourself to never giving up on this process. Then you're going to write down in those 3 categories what your experience was that day. So we're going to do this for the remaining days between this lecture and the next lecture. Also, if you are reaching your goal, I want you to just hold it. You don't need to increase the time. You don't need to do anything. You can if you feel compelled to do so. Absolutely, but you don't need to. So just hold whatever your goal that you set for yourself was. So that'll be fine to start there. So now, inevitably, there's probably going to be some situation, something that comes up, some argument that happens, something that happens at work that causes a craving to come up or a compulsion to use to come up before we make it through our self-prescribed time interval. So we're going to go over some strategies for dealing with that. The first being distraction. So this can mean if say you have a smoking problem or a chewing problem and there's a big oral fixation component of this, perhaps that looks like having gum or sunflower seeds or something like that. So that's how distraction can look. Another way it can look is just doing something completely different when the craving comes up, whether it's reading or exercising or watching TV or engaging in some facet of your job or whatever. I mean, just literally doing anything to refocus away from the craving into something else. So it can look that way too. The second way of combating this is direct confrontation. And so what this looks like is going into complete acceptance and being willing to go into the sensation of craving. And I will warn you that at first this is extremely difficult. And with enough practice and time, it gets to a point where it isn't difficult. It isn't difficult and it goes right through you. So this second strategy is the one that is going to promote healing the most quickly and promote proficiency in terms of moving towards healthier things most quickly. It's also the most difficult. So I wouldn't recommend only using this strategy as you're starting out. Just use it as you can tolerate it. So basically, this is going to do two things. You're going to sink into this feeling of craving and really experientially go into those three columns that we were just talking about, the physical, emotional, and the mental, and really just be in what is there. And so you're going to, for me, when I was implementing this, a lot of times this looked like just sitting down and closing my eyes and not doing anything and just being entirely with whatever sensations were coming up. And there were some pretty gnarly sensations that come up, and that is very normal. So a lot of times it can be helpful to focus on the breath when you're doing this. It can be helpful to notice the thought content and start to tie the link between the thought patterns and what's going on emotionally and what's going on physically, like where you hold the tension in your body and this kind of stuff. Performing this gives you tremendous insight as to what's going on in your cognitive, emotional, and physical bodies. Like there's just, it's incredibly useful. And also, it's not that easy to implement right off the bat because you haven't trained your nervous system to do it. So what this does in part is we are training our nervous system to go into the craving or whatever it is we're trying to get away from and be in that and then bring it back. Bring it back to being in a state of peace and rest and stillness. And then maybe it goes back out. Maybe you're back in craving. You're like, yeah, but I want this thing. And then we bring it back. So what you're doing when you utilize this method is you're training. You're training your nervous system. You are building resilience. So maybe we have a rubber band and we can only stretch it this far when we start. And then over time, we build that elasticity, we build that resiliency, and we can kind of go further and further away from ourselves because we know we can bring it back. So that's what this does in part. And the other thing that this does is it gives you a lot of information as to what it is you're running from an experiential standpoint. What are you unwilling to sit with? What is it? And then as you're able to sit with, you're like, oh, I don't have to do anything with that. I can be with it. Again, this is a process. It takes time. It's a skill, but as you are able to implement it in your strategies for dealing with craving and the emotions that come up in this process. And then 3, the other strategy that you can use is use thought to deter your use for a little bit longer. So an example of this would be maybe you're coming up close to your prescribed period of abstinence and you're starting to feel craving or whatever, and you're like, I bet I can go an extra 40 minutes, or I bet I can, you like kind of turn it into a game. So as that craving starts to come up, maybe you start to look at it as like if you're a little kid and you're having a contest to see like who can hold their breath the longest or something like that. You can use your brain and your thought patterns to turn it into like a contest with yourself, or like, yeah, I've been holding my goal consistently all day, so I'm going to see if I can just, go full send and not use it for the rest of the day, or whatever. So that's one way. You can use thought to think about something else, something that makes you happy. Maybe you have things that you specifically that are in your life that you're doing this for. Maybe you have young children that will benefit from you making these changes. Maybe you have a marriage that you hold, a pet, whatever. Something that motivates you to be better, to heal, to get better. So maybe you use thought to think of those things when you're coming into craving or coming up against roadblocks or that kind of thing. So usually some combination of these three things is good to start. And then the more you're able to rely on the second one, the confrontation, the better. I mean, in terms of getting through things the quickest and stuff. But it's just like anything else, if you're in the early stages of practicing yoga, like you're not going to attempt certain things because the likelihood of you hurting yourself and then having to sit it out for months or weeks or whatever is pretty high if you try to go in too fast too soon. And it's not really that much different with this. So don't push it to the point where you've like completely fried your nervous system because you refuse to do this perfectly immediately. So then on top of that, you've got these fights with your family and your job's falling apart and you start to manifest all this stuff. So like, don't do that. Just do what you can effectively tolerate and push yourself to an edge that doesn't cause you to implode, and then start utilizing some other strategies to bring it back, or engage and use if you need to. Again, this first part is mostly about observing and understanding and not doing anything with the things that come up, just understanding them. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Again, each day before you go to bed, you're going to thank yourself. You're going to recommit yourself to this process. Just some mantra of like, I'm never going to stop trying, no matter how badly I think I'm failing. And then write down in the 3 columns what's happened for you in terms of how you're experiencing the things as they start to surface. So, and then at the end of this week of doing this, I want you to write down the longest time interval you were able to go and ballpark a percentage of how well you did in terms of holding the space between your prescribed period of abstinence. So actually write that down maybe right after your recordings of your different body experiences. So medications that can be helpful with this, if you're struggling with alcohol use disorder, naltrexone or Vivitrol are excellent choices. Naltrexone is the oral form of Vivitrol. Vivitrol is a shot that you get in the butt every 30 days. This substance helps particularly with alcohol cravings by working on the dopamine reward system. It also really dampens the reward of using alcohol. So meaning you can take naltrexone and you can drink, and what happens is you experience the toxicity of the alcohol and not the high, not the euphoria. So it can really help support your brain in associating alcohol with a poison instead of a stress relief or something that creates euphoria or something. So that can be a tremendous tool for people. Highly recommend that drug. And I don't highly recommend a lot of drugs, but that one's pretty good. So that can be a good one. For smoking cessation, Wellbutrin can be really helpful. Chantix can be helpful too, but there's a lot of side effects with that one. So, and just make sure, you're talking to your doctor, obviously, about these things, other medications you're on before you start anything. These drugs that I'm talking about now are prescription. So, would warrant a conversation with your primary care provider. So, Wellbutrin's a good one for smoking. Chantix, while it's highly effective, once you go off of it, there's a high instance of relapse. And again, it has a high side effect profile. So that one can be tricky. And then for opioid use disorder, what I observed when I was working in addiction is that a lot of people who have opioid use disorder are pretty well versed in terms of utilization of Suboxone or methadone or something similar. So if that's something that you need, I would recommend spacing that out as much as you can. I know that there's obviously sort of a more complicated physiologic process when it comes to withdrawing from opiates and alcohol than there are some of these other drugs. So again, a good idea to work with a physician or nurse practitioner or counselor or somebody as you're navigating that. But again, really the goal with all of this is to create the space. So whether you're doing that with Suboxone or with your drug of choice or whatever, just keep trying to increase the intervals between, which is essentially, what you're doing when you're tapering off of Suboxone 2, right? You're just increasing the period of time between use. So this isn't vastly different than that. So those are some good prescription meds that you can use. Other supportive supplements that can be used during this process, if you're not on any other medications, St. John's wort can really help with depression. 5-HTP is excellent. It's the precursor for serotonin, so basically gives your body what it needs to make that. That can be very helpful. Melatonin can help for sleep. For a daily nervous system support, lion's mane mushroom and tulsi or holy basil are excellent choices in terms of just, helping to calm that down and helping with that skill of going out and bringing things back to baseline. Ashwagandha and kava are excellent for anxiety and are good in the evenings for sleep as well. So that concludes the portion on dealing with the symptom. So now we are going to spend this second part going into strategies for healing the actual wounding that's causing said symptom. And these two, mind you, these two skills, they're obviously not unrelated, but one is sort of being pointed at this behavior and the other is sort of being pointed more in a core sort of way. So what you feel when things come up, that being with that is going to create inside of you what you need to heal that. So if you are coming up, you're in craving, you're in anxiety, you're in whatever, your ability to be in that is going to show your body, without you having to think about this or really do anything, in this automatic way, what it needs to do to regulate and reset itself. So your allowance of discomfort, your allowance of imbalance, your ability to sit and contain that and breathe is going to give your body the information that it needs to create the medicine that it needs to heal your nervous system and your brain. So, at first, like we talked about earlier, the first layer of this, if you're using a substance, is probably going to look like some form of withdrawal. So typically, and depending on what substance we're talking about, withdrawal can last for varying lengths of time. Typically, acute withdrawal for most things from when we put the substance down, if we do that perfectly, meaning there's no use after that, typically we're looking at somewhere between 3 and 7 days, depending on what it is. So what we're doing with this is we are creating these gaps where we have more and more clarity, meaning like we get beneath the withdrawal in order to get to the other stuff that's, again, causing the symptom. So because this isn't an abstinence-based program, there isn't sort of this expectation of like, okay, we're going to go through this thing for 3 to 7 days, and then you're going to be through the withdrawal, and then you start dealing with the other stuff. It's not really like that. It's more of a waxing and waning. So you'll smoke the cigarette, you'll, feel the relief, then you're going to go into the withdrawal, you're going to kind of feel that. Then the longer and longer you go, you're going to get longer and longer gaps where you kind of get underneath the withdrawal, the agitation of the thing. And that's, at that point is where we start generating the medicine for our own wounding, where we start generating the understanding of the sensation, of the problem, of the original programming, of whatever that's causing the pain, that's causing us to seek outside. So the more you are able to sit with the discomfort, that comes up, the faster you will make your own medicine to this. The longer you'll be able to go between use, the easier it'll be for you to get to this wounding, the easier it's going to be for your body and mind and emotional center to do what it needs to do to repair itself. And the more information you're going to get on what you need to do in your outside life in order to fix the problems that are causing the reopening of these wounds. So this first part of dealing with the core wound is really about surrender. It's about surrendering to the almost unbearable emotional pain that surfaces, especially early on when you haven't trained yourself. Surrendering to craving, to compulsion, without doing anything with it. So this is the part where I have often joked with some colleagues and friends about where you just sit on your hands. There's nothing to do with it. It surfaces and you don't do anything. And you just sit on your hands until it changes, and you notice what happens inside of you until it changes. And this was also true for me when I was going through the worst of the worst in terms of the mental health crisis. And you know, I had one friend that would call in particular, and she was like, "How you doing today?" And I'm like, "I'm just sitting on my hands," meaning, you know, I'm just doing what I can to not do anything stupid, basically. And for a while, that's how it goes, you know. So this is a part where we're going to start surrendering to the sensations and the things that come up, and we're not going to do anything with them, and we're going to be with them, and we're going to notice them. So there are examples that we go through as humans that force surrender. I don't have any children, but the women that I've talked to that have been through this process without being medicated talk about how you just have no other choice than to completely surrender to the intensity of the pain. Like, you just have to go with it. And the more you resist it, the worse it gets. And that absolutely has been my experience with some of the emotional and mental health symptoms that have come up for me. Like, it's kind of like there are two choices. And I've run into this a lot where it's like, okay, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to have to be with this. But like, there are literally no other options. Like, there's no other way out, like kind of backed against this corner of, you can surrender to this thing and not resist it and just sort of allow it to take over you and move through you and then get up and move on with your life. Or you can resist it and, you know, do something permanent that's going to leave a gaping hole in this world and in the lives of your family and the people you love. And so, you know, you sort of start to understand that the surrender is really the only humane way to deal with these things. So natural childbirth, any kind of like traumatic, bone breaking, that kind of pain, you know, we're just forced to kind of go into this place of like, okay, this is happening. I have to be with it. There's no other choice. Another analogy you could think of is, you know, like a child who's resisting getting shots at the doctor's office. You know, maybe they're kicking and screaming and you know, whatever, it takes 3 nurses to hold them down or something. And if that child, which of course they can't understand this, but if they would just surrender to it and this is every parent's dream. If they just surrender to it and do it, they would expend, you know, a fraction of the energy than they do if they fight it. It would be, you know, perhaps painful, but infinitely less painful than when they fight it. So it's not any different with this stuff. And, you know, while I always prided myself on being someone that could hold a tremendous amount of physical pain, whenever something emotional would come up that I didn't want to feel, I was like, all right, get me out of here. Get me out of my body, get me out of the situation, get me out of, you know, just very avoidant of that. So most of us have, you know, different things that trigger that sort of like, get me out of here response. And that is exactly the behavior that we're trying to rein in and learn how to contain and be with. So we are in sort of these peaks and valleys of discomfort and relief and discomfort and relief. When we start to get up here with the discomfort, start to try to look at those as opportunities to be with whatever is coming up, because again, it is going to give you exactly what you need to get better. And the more frequently and the more time you're able to spend doing this, the faster it will go. Set short expectations for yourself at first. Notice where your threshold is, both physically and with time. And maybe you're able to see it through until you're through the craving or through the emotion or through whatever it is. And that's great if you are able to do that. And then maybe sometimes you are not able to do that and it ends in a like, my hands are going up, I'm going outside to smoke, I don't care, whatever you're doing, and that's okay too. But know that we're moving towards the ability to be with it all the way through, meaning like you feel it come on, you feel it in your body, you feel what it's doing to you, in you, and you're able to breathe through it or get through it without engaging in the behavior. That is the goal. And so we need to start moving towards that point. It doesn't need to happen immediately, but that's where we would, that's where we're going with this. So, again, this is very hard. So be gentle with yourself. This is not something we're taught. It's one of those things like a foreign language, if we were taught to do it as children, it would be infinitely easier in adulthood, but we aren't. So, be patient with yourself as you move through this, and, just your very attempt at performing it is big. So don't undermine that. Another thing that can be helpful is to try to put yourself back and forth between an observational perspective and a feeling perspective. So if you can, again, when you're sort of at the peaks of these times of discomfort, start to try to step out of your experience of what's going on and watch what's going on for you. For some people, it can be helpful to sort of like close their eyes and envision themselves kind of above their body, like watching what's going on. So that can be helpful. You can also try to observe the sensations in your body without creating any stories around them, or without having any sort of agenda in terms of figuring out what they mean or alleviating them or any of that. You can experience them differently that way. And when it's from an observational standpoint, what you'll find as you get better and better at getting into that role is that it's just completely neutral. So like this pain that I carry around in my neck all the time, like maybe, I'm able to go into that and experience it more in terms of just non-judgmental ways of describing it, versus like not even using pain, just using, well, maybe it's pins and needles, and maybe it's, sort of numbness, or maybe it's like this sort of heaviness, or, you start to notice it in a way where you're not necessarily trying to get away from it. So if you can flip back and forth between this sort of like I'm observing this versus I'm in it, I'm feeling it, that can be helpful too, because it helps you get different perspectives on what's happening for you. Because if you're always in this feeling perspective, it's very easy to get caught up of like, I'm in pain, I hate this sucks, like I can't do this or whatever. You get really overwhelmed. And so by sort of taking breaks, by shifting into this observational pattern of like, okay, and for me, what this looked like was again, kind of hovering above and being like, oh, she's upset, kind of watching myself as though I were some character in a TV show, and just making very neutral but accurate notes and commentary about what is going on with that person. So maybe start practicing, flipping back and forth between those two. Both are important perspectives to have, and it's a good skill set to being able to just, it's good to be able to just watch yourself instead of all the time, being in these sort of sludgy, difficult emotions, feelings, all of that. So, again, as you become more proficient at this, you're going to gain not only this physiologic understanding of what your body needs to heal itself, you're also going to start gaining information on what you need to do differently in order to set your life up so that it creates a space and an opportunity for this wound to effectively heal. Because if we do all this work on the inside and then we don't change anything in our lives, it just keeps recreating the same mess so we could be doing all this work to heal it, whatever, but then we go out and we do our lives and we're still doing these things that cause us all these problems. And so we're not really getting anywhere. It's like a 1 step forward, 2 step back kind of thing. So we have to start being receptive to information that we get on how to structure our lives differently so that we can guard this process that we've started with this wounding. So you can think of it as like, a baby plant, and it needs to have protection from things that are going to eat it, from the wind, from the elements, from all these things. It's not really that different with this. So, that can look like carving out some time for the end, at the end of the day for yourself to feel whatever you need to feel, or maybe do your writing or whatever. Or maybe it's at the beginning of the day. I mean, people are busy. You're going to have to be flexible with this, but you are also absolutely going to have to prioritize ways to set yourself up for success. So as you gain information into this, which this process will help you do, it's important to start taking steps to creating that for yourself. So again, maybe it's like blocking off 30 minutes at the end of the day of like, I'm going to go do this. I expect to not be interrupted, or like whatever it is. Maybe it's moving for 10 to 30 minutes a day or whatever. It can look however it looks. But when you get that information, and you'll know when you'll get it because it'll keep coming up. It'll keep coming up as like, hey, do this little like nudgy thing, your intuition being like, this is what would be really helpful for you. Listen to that and start creating the space and taking the steps in order to make it possible, because you are getting information on what's going to heal specifically you, and no one can give you that information besides yourself. It has to come from in here. And that's the tricky part is, all day long we can say like, yeah, you need to eat better, you need to exercise, you need to stop smoking. Yeah, sure, of course. But how you're going to get out of the dysfunction and into a place of health and happiness and harmony, that has to come from you. And so when we sit with these things, we're creating the physiologic medicine that we need to fix our nervous systems, and we're also creating the ability to start picking out pieces of information that we need specifically for ourselves to get better. And maybe the first thing you need isn't exercise. Maybe it's not. For me, it was not exercise. That was not the first thing that I needed. There were other things. I needed to sit. I needed to be still. I needed to learn how to meditate. I needed to, there were a lot of other things that I needed first. And for some people, maybe they need to exercise first. So this is a very person-to-person process. So be mindful of that. And as you start getting the information and you start feeling your body get what it needs to fix this thing, please do the best that you can to honor that. How you experience things like drug withdrawal is going to give you information about what you're dealing with and what your current level of resiliency is in terms of sitting with that. So if you come up against a craving and you're like, I absolutely cannot sit with this. Okay, so we know where our first work is, right? Or maybe you're like, I can sit with this for, a period of time, but then it comes back with a vengeance or whatever. So you're going to use how this manifests for you, again, in this physical, emotional, cognitive sort of way, to tailor your approach. So in being willing to sit with it for any length of time, whether it's like minutes or hours or whatever, you're in the process of gathering that information. And once you've gathered that information, you can utilize it to hasten your process. So we have to surrender to the experience for some period of time. It does not have to be a long period of time, but for some period of time. And so you start this process ideally during your periods of prescribed abstinence, and think of it as sort of trying to melt into something that you've historically tried to get away from. So, if we've historically tried to claw ourselves away from certain sensations or things, like try not doing that. Try just doing nothing with it. It's incredibly simple, extremely difficult. Do nothing with it. Literally sit on your hands for 5 minutes and notice what happens. And just that is going to start building the medicine and the clarity that you need to get better. So the second part of this lecture, in terms of how to deal with sort of the wounding, like it's a big part of it, is just doing absolutely nothing during periods of the higher threshold of discomfort. It's good to carve space out for yourself to feel things. A lot of times all the stuff that we've been covering up with the distraction, with the distraction of addiction, with the time that it takes up, with the energy it takes up, once we start to clear some of that out, some of the stuff starts steeping from the wound that we're trying to get away from or cover up, right? So now you've kind of created this opening and it starts sort of pouring out. So if you're more tearful, if you're more emotional, if you are a little more volatile, like these are very normal things. And while, you can't always completely allow their expression, create as much space as you can for the expression of these things, because what's happening is you're recreating that tie between yourself and your willingness to feel these things. So that's also a skill. It also requires time and is a beautiful thing, and also is at first a very hard thing, because the first thing that's probably going to pop forward is all that pain that we've been suppressing. It's like pressure cooker in there. Create the opening, it starts shooting up. You kind of have all these wild things happen that you haven't had happen in a long time. Very normal thing. Try to create dedicated space to allowing it. Think of this phase of things as wound debridement. So, someone has a severe burn, or, some kind of road rash or something that's really deep and gnarly, and we've got to go in and kind of, remove these layers so that it doesn't get infected, and remove these, it's painful and it hurts. And then once you get it removed, you feel really raw and open and vulnerable, and it doesn't, it's like, don't touch me, don't look at me, get away from me, like all of these things. And it's not really different. So, we're dealing with the symptom, and in that we're getting access to this wounding that's very painful, and we start peeling back these layers, and it is raw. It's raw and it's uncomfortable, and we don't want other people to see these things in us, even though we all have the same thing. It's really something. But, it's tender for a while, and it gets to a point where you build a solid set of skin, a solid amount of healing has occurred, so it's no longer quite as gnarly. But in order to get to that first point, we got to peel back these things, and it's quite uncomfortable. So that's very normal. And the more proficient you get at being with that discomfort, the faster the healing will occur. That's not to say push it to the point where you completely rip the skin off and just kind of caused a whole nother set of issues to deal with. So you got to find the space between that and pushing yourself up to your the limitations that you can safely adhere to. So again, this step is largely about being with. It's about observing. It's about understanding. It is not about doing. There may be a strong compulsion or tendency to do something with things when they come up, both because, number one, you're uncomfortable, and we all try to do things when we're uncomfortable to fix the discomfort. So try not to do that to the extent that you're causing more damage. Absolutely use any self-healing, self-soothing things that you have that can kind of maybe take the edge off. But, don't do things like, decide to leave your marriage or your job or sell your children or any of that maybe in this first week, because, if these things are supposed to fall off in your life, they will eventually, but that's not where we are. Where we are is learning, observing, gathering information, and we are in the very early processes of generating the medicine that we specifically need in order to fix these things. So again, be very patient with yourself. Be very patient with yourself. Make sure to consciously bring in compassion for yourself and gratitude for your willingness to engage in this period. And just don't give up. Just commit to not giving up, and you will not fail. So there are some book recommendations for this stage. The first one that I'm going to recommend for this particular set of things, there's a book called Quit Like a Woman. It's by Holly Whitaker, specifically for alcohol use disorder, this book is phenomenal, even if you're not a woman. She does a really great job of reframing how we look at alcohol societally, and then some of her personal run-ins with the existing paradigms. So whether you're woman, man, or other, it's an excellent book. So highly recommend that one. And I would give it at least 7 days between this lecture and the next. And if you are needing longer, take 10 to 14 days for proper integration of what we've discussed here. So thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you in a week.